some of my personality style, like it's so golden, like I would get good praise and results from striving and from pleasing people and, endearing myself to other people and stuff like that. It was hard to see what the negative of that was. And I do think there is great negative, but early in my life, I was very blind to it.
Welcome to the Crucible Project Podcast. The Crucible Project is a nonprofit organization committed to creating a world of men and women who live with integrity, grace, and courage, helping them to fulfill their God-given purpose. This podcast will discuss important and sometimes difficult topics while delivering practical life applications with men and women who are currently practicing this work. We are igniting Christ-like change in men and women through experiences of radical honesty and grace.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Crucible Project Podcast. I am one of your hosts, Jess Donovan, and today I have my friend Kim Rush on with me. She is a certified retreat leader with Crucible. She has been in this work for a while, is an amazing human being as well, but I won't try to steal her thunder in sharing all these things. So, Kim, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thank you, Jess.
Yeah.
Glad to be with you today.
So glad to have you. Now, Kim, when you go ahead and tell us, who is Kim Rush? What is life like for you right now?
Well, I am a mom of 3, and I've been married for over 20 years. I live in Oklahoma.
Heyo.
I grew up in California, and my husband's from here, and we took a long stint of living in Mexico as missionaries and then moved back to Oklahoma. I think I've been here for 8 years. And my life right now is like I homeschool my kids, but my 2 youngest kids are seniors in high school. They're twins.
Okay.
And they're about to graduate. They're actually in their last semester of high school.
Wow.
And so my life is like on the brink of change because I'm also graduating from homeschooling and looking ahead to the future, So it's like I can't decide if I'm going to take a gap year, if I want to go to Europe and backpack, but also just looking ahead toward things that make me excited and that I feel drawn to, and Crucible is one of those things.
Yeah.
So
that's so cool, man. So many things right there between homeschooling and your potential gap year. So if you could live your wildest dream and do anything crazy and adventurous on that gap year, what would it be?
I have a bucket list of places I would want to go, and I would love it if I could have a fully funded gap year.
Oh,
I'm not really sure how that would work, but in our imaginary scenario,
100%.
I want to go to the Northern Lights. I would love to see the Northern Lights.
Yes.
And I saw a magazine or something, a picture of like this hut thing with a glass wall and ceiling where you could just lay in bed and maybe read a book, cozy up and watch the Northern Lights. I'm like, I want to go there.
That is the dream.
But I've always been like, I've desired to go to other places like Thailand, probably mostly because I love Thai food, but it looks exotic and interesting.
Yep.
And so I'd like to travel around, if I were in my ultimate gap year of graduating from homeschooling, then I would definitely take a long stint of travel.
Oh, I love it. I think that's so fun. Yeah. So homeschooling, and you said you were a missionary and also that you lived in California. So expand a little bit more on that journey. Like how do you go from California to missionary life and then to homeschooling?
Yeah. I actually went to a mission school when I was young out of high school. Like when I graduated high school, I had heard about this mission school and I had a few friends that I knew who went through it. It was an internship, like apprenticeship program.
Okay.
And that put me in Texas.
Okay.
And then I lived in Russia for a year with that internship.
What?
As a young person, like unattached, which honestly, Jess, like it feels like a lifetime ago because now I'm 45 and I have 3 kids, but it was before I was married. And when I think back on that time now, I feel like it was me becoming my own person outside of my parents' house. And I got to do it like with a group of people that were centered around God. And I sort of got to come into my own with that unique focus.
Yeah.
And I didn't have any other responsibilities except for getting to know God better as a disciple and then sharing that with people. So it is a passion of mine.
Yeah.
And I loved that season, as unique as it was, you know.
Yep.
It had a hard ending for me.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just how I think life really goes in missions and everywhere. So there was a lot of unexpected stress and heaviness with how that closed up. I won't go into it, but then I moved back to California with my folks for about 6 months, kind of like get my feet back under me and figure out what to do. I was in a funny relationship with my husband where we had never really dated, but okay, it was like in the yesteryear of the internet. So we emailed each other, and that was a really big thing.
Oh, yeah.
It was dial-up, so we had to listen to the modem sounds and all that stuff. But he and I had never really dated, and we were pretty serious about each other, but we didn't live in the same continent, you know, and we weren't, I think that the instructions when I was in AIM, I don't think this is the route that you intended me to go in this conversation.
Love it. Bring it on.
The instructions for AIM students in my year, they try all kinds of different ways to keep kids focused, you know. Mine was, we strongly encourage you not to date. And I was a rule follower, so I followed that with like rigidity. That's actually, that is part of my shadow, and I followed it with rigidity. So I was bound and determined not to date, and Tim was not in AIM, so he was bound and determined to go ahead and try to ask me out.
My goodness.
And am I getting to tell this story? And he's not even present, so I'm going to say whatever I want to about it, and he just has to listen later and be like,
we love it. You go,
He
Kim.
usually tells the stories, though. If you know us, you know that you've heard this story from him first. So it's like, yes,
this is so exciting. Inside.
He would ask me out sometimes. Like I hung out with he and friends, and he would be like, hey, some of us are going to go do something. Do you want to go out tomorrow when we, whatever, you know, go out to eat? And I'd be like, oh, sure. But if he came up to me like a little bit more hesitant or nervous, and he said, I was just wondering if you would want to do something sometime. I was like, nope, something sometime. I can't.
That's a hard
date.
pass. Yeah.
You know, I'm in AIM. So we had our own drama. It's like this little funny mini soap opera of trying to figure out, this is my, you know, hadn't dated a lot, rigid, rule following self, and then how to figure out how to work it out. But fast forward, we ended up, I moved to Texas after I'd been in California for a little bit, where Tim lived.
Okay.
And there's a funnier story about that. At one point he came to visit me in California and my folks, you know, and it was like, we had one of those conversations that I was like feeling nervous about moving to Texas, mostly to date Tim. It seemed like something that irresponsible people would do, and I was not irresponsible, you know?
Can't have that.
So it was like, it also feels like a lot of pressure, because we've never even really dated, and I'm like moving across the country. So I just want to put all that out front, you know? And he was like, what happened? Did we just break up? And I was like, well, were we even together?
Yeah, so
was that big question mark, you know? And somehow we made it through all that.
Oh my gosh. I love that.
Yeah. So we got married. We were involved in a lot of missions stuff because he also was connected with that school, and that was sort of our people. And we ended up being invited by a mission team that was in Mexico, and we joined them for, I think 12 years or a little bit less than that. We moved one time in the end of our time in Mexico to start a new work with friends. And actually that had a really hard ending. And we ended up back in the States, almost, I would say unexpectedly, but it was like the hopes that we had for that place just for many reasons didn't materialize. And it was really hard for us and hard for our friends that we had joined. We each kind of ended up needing to revisit what life was going to look like. And that's actually when I ended up going to my first initiatory weekend
Wow.
with this kind of work.
Okay. Huh.
So
Yeah, and so it sounds like, man, so first, I love all all the fun in that story and, Kim who can't rule break and oh man, it's
yeah.
so precious.
Mm.
But also it sounds like God was just doing such a work in you from that first, mission school experience where it sounds like there was some disappointment there as well, right? And so having to come out of that,
Yeah.
but then to go back into mission work, even from that, like, I'm curious, what was the conversation with you and God like, re-stepping even into Mexico of like, okay, so there was this
Mm.
pain here. So how do I step into this? Like, did anything around that show up for you?
It did. And I love you just mentioning like the long road, the
Mm-hmm.
long journey that we're on with God, because I can see God's gentle hand in each of the
Mm-hmm.
steps, and I felt fearful about returning to missions, but more, I actually, I think I'm a idealist,
Yeah. Yeah.
and maybe a recovering idealist. I'm not really sure if that's an appropriate term, but
uh,
I think it is.
yeah.
Um, so I felt like at that young age of 23 or
Mm-hmm.
however old I was,
Mm-hmm.
that was like young mom moving to Mexico. I was young,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, maybe a little bit older than that, maybe 25 by that time. I felt like I had learned a lot from what didn't go well.
Mm.
And I didn't think all of the what didn't go wells were like up to me and my choices, but it helped me think about how I would want to set things up differently if we ever did that long term ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
with how support was gathered and distributed and lines of authority. And like the tribe that I grew up in, we're big on autonomy. And so
Mm-hmm.
um, that it really solidified some of that for me. So in my young and I would say immature state, I feel like I had lived through something hard, worked out how it could be different, and then decided that will never happen again. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
it'll just
Yeah.
everything will be just as it should be.
Oh,
Like
a
utopia,
hundred percent, right? Like we,
Yeah, I dream about utopia
oh yes.
slash heaven, and then I get surprised, disappointed, and perplexed, and all the other
uh,
harder things, like when it doesn't happen,
yeah.
you know?
Yeah, that makes sense, right? And so I think
Yeah.
we figure something out, like, man, and then we got it. And so
Oh yeah.
yeah,
Oh
I
yeah.
mean, right before 25 is prefrontal lobe, being fully developed
Oh
too.
yeah.
So
Oh yeah. And I knew like we had it going. We
oh,
had it all set.
a hundred
With a
percent.
lot of question marks, genuinely, like being a new parent.
Mm,
Those were my bigger question marks. It's the normal question marks
yeah.
and doing it in another place.
Yeah, that's huge. And so like definitely what a huge step for young 25-year-old Kim to step back into missionary work there to, take her and her family to Mexico. And I'm sure like 12 years, that's a huge, huge time in life. So what did even that season look like for you? Like as you were a missionary in Mexico, um, was it a positive experience? Like what was going on then for you?
Mm. Yeah, it was a positive experience for me. It was wildly positive much of the time. Like I
Mm-hmm.
really enjoyed it, and I think I felt like I was in my sweet spot in some of the
Mm-hmm.
seasons. I had one son, Quincy, that Tim and I had when we lived in Texas, and then we moved to Mexico and had
Mm-hmm.
twins after we moved there. And my focus was divided, and I think well, rightly
Mm-hmm.
so. I would say balanced. I did some mission stuff, and I think that's a calling for me and exciting and charges my batteries. And I did a lot of parent
Yeah.
stuff, just
Yeah.
real life with kids. And I was exhausted, and they were very tiny. So I was trying to figure out how to get up in the middle of the night and feed them and all of that. And I read a book that was really formative for me the twins were really young. It's called Sacred Rhythms by Ruth Haley Barton.
Okay.
I don't know if you've ever read it,
No.
but it's a spiritual disciplines book. But it wasn't like any other book that I had read. And for me, like I grew up as a striver, and I really like would, I don't know, just love to throw myself into whatever the project is that gave me the most excitement. And this book actually was about stepping back and letting your soul come out and speak and giving space for that and resting with God. And also walking in some of these disciplines, but not in a striving way of like accomplishing something big, but really establishing a steady relationship with God. And, I mentioned that like budding legalist that I was.
Yeah.
That kind of learning about relearning, I guess, about more quiet practices with God, contemplative spaces was really big for me. And I actually think, I don't know how God would have done it, if I hadn't walked the path that I walked, but because I was far away from home and the church structure that I grew up in, we were working in house churches. I wrestled a lot with what was allowed and wasn't, what I should do and what I shouldn't. Like I felt very safe in the structure where I had grown up. God had a lot of learning for me in doing some things that were different,
Yeah.
It was hard and it was really good and really hard. Did I say that already?
Really hard, really good.
Yeah.
It's like the
really
opposite
good, really
of a
hard.
compliment sandwich, right? Like it was really hard,
Yeah.
but good, but really hard all at the same time. And man, if that doesn't sum up the journey with Jesus, I don't know what does, right? Like there's so much goodness, but there's also so much that's hard, whether it's things that are outside of our control, whether it's things that, we are taking part of, things that we are bringing forward even. And so it sounds like, you were present with God being present in all of those pieces and what he was doing in and with you. But then you had also mentioned, like at the time you started dating Tim, you were a rule follower. And so that was all present. And then as you were a missionary in Mexico, it was coming to terms with these pieces of like, I see that I strive here. And, like wasn't a striving that produced rest, but was going like, okay, like, is this striving serving me or not? And so you had mentioned after Mexico that you were jumping into something new that didn't work out. And so, had also gone on your initial weekend. But I'm curious, before your initial weekend, was there a place where you were feeling stuck? Like where you were like, this just isn't working out in my life? Was there anything like that for you?
Yeah, there was a long season like that. We actually, like Tim and I prayerfully decided to move to a different place in Mexico. And then, like I said, that door closed. And it was obvious and hard. And truly, I didn't want that opportunity to be over. And we decided to move back to Oklahoma. And that was a time of real heaviness for me when I moved. And I would describe many experiences of stuckness in that space. And part of it was related to mourning. I think that a loss of a dream that I had that I really thought was going to be carrying us through our retirement years and into the future, and then coming back to the States, back into our own tribe of fellowship when I had been living in a house church setting with pretty different function was a big loss because of just where we landed and how we decided to engage in the place that we landed. I ended up not employed in ministry, even though I really wanted it. And I was homeschooling the kids. That was pretty new. So there's some goodness in that, but I had a passion for these other things and I kept trying to find a way forward. And honestly, I'm still kind of on that path. So it's not like I'm fully unstuck, but at a time, there was a time period where I think that striver part of me, I felt like I needed to just really shut it off and do what was necessary.
Mm-hmm.
And I learned about myself, this could come later, but when I find that I'm doing something and I need to shift, I will sometimes overcorrect and strive in a way that's not healthy toward something else.
Okay.
And so the shift, I think, was trying to shut down like my passions that I really loved because they weren't possible,
Yeah.
and just not really knowing how to handle that and how to deal with it. Tried to put a cap on a lot of those dreams and passions.
Wow.
It's not as simple as that. That sounds more simplistic, I think, than the big messy hairball that it really was. But
Yeah.
like that's the gist of it. And that is when I ended up going on this first learning experience, which was pretty amazing, honestly. I think I didn't know what I would work on exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew about Crucible. My husband had actually been to the Crucible Project a few years before we moved away from Mexico.
Okay.
I knew about it. I didn't know very much,
Yeah.
and I didn't know what I would want out of it and what I would want to work on. And they say, it's important that you have an idea about that. And I was like, I don't know. And I honestly think that I hadn't lived through such a dark
Yeah.
place
Yeah.
yet in my life, and coming into a place that was really hard, spending some time in the pit, like in the darkness, clarified some of what I needed to work on, what I wanted and what I hoped to get out of it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really big. And, I know that you mentioned, like, I don't know if this, even covers the mess it was, but yeah, I'm just tender listening as, you came from such a huge ministry, huge, and especially it's one thing to do that ministry on your own, but then to carry that with your family and to come back and have those pieces that are part of you, right? Like, hopefully, as disciples of Jesus, our ministry is, all of who we are. And so to have to come back and try to renegotiate these parts of yourself and go, okay, what do I do with this passion? How do I, step into this? It makes sense that at the time it would have felt safe for you to just shut those pieces down when really they are important parts of you. And so, yeah, I can see how that would cause a lot of grief and a lot of sadness, and yeah, just that darkness. And I think it's even cool that you were able to realize, like, if I hadn't gone to this dark place, then I wouldn't have gotten to, realize that this was what was really here. So, as you kind of looked at that part of you that was striving, I'm curious if that was protective in any way of maybe keeping you from realizing what was there in the darkness. Like, was that there to protect you in any way, that striving part?
That's a great question. I don't know the answer to that in that moment. I imagine so, Jess. I think that part, that striving part, has been protective for me for a long time. I'm thinking about when I was in college, I'd done the mission school, and then I went to college and got married while I was a student in college. And then, so my formative years, like, even were built around missions, and I was remembering a time when I was studying, I got my bachelor's in social work. So it's like prior to graduating college, I was actually writing in my journal, and I was a great student,
Yeah.
but I was actually writing a prayer to God, and I looked down at it and realized this seems like I'm writing a term paper, like I'm trying to be as impressive as I can.
Wow.
With God, though, that seems kind of twisted. And this is a picture of my striving, though, just so you can get
Yeah.
an example of the overreaction. So I saw what I didn't like that I was doing, and I felt like was showy and whatever that was, attention seeking with God, and bragging, or I don't know, something. So then I was like, it was a prayer that I had been writing, I think. And I decided I will never write prayers in my journal anymore, like, because it takes a dark path in my soul.
Mm.
That is still striving, but it's like
Yeah.
it's an overcorrection instead of
Totally.
being like, wow, maybe I could be watchful of myself.
Yeah.
And I think that striving part was trying to make sure that I show up well and that I do
Mm-hmm.
right,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but is somewhat uninformed and immature in how to go about it,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Yeah.
And like we don't know how to do what we don't know and what we've not done before.
Totally.
And learning is like that. But I did that. It's kind of it's a small picture of what I did in that move.
Mm.
I didn't totally shut down from life, but I tried to shut down a lot of parts of me that were still longing for something different.
Mm.
And then I also tried to show up in a way that would bring it about in the context where, where we now live,
Mm-hmm.
that I think were misguided and
Sure.
idealistic,
Yeah.
the recovering idealizer that I am.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. It is, man, that striving. I can so relate to that. And so I am tender around your experience in that because I too am one of those striving perfectionists. Even like it comes down to my relationship with God, where, also in full time ministry, that's my role in life. And I was
Mhm.
just having a conversation last week where I realized that this frustration that I was feeling was that I was striving for God and felt like I wasn't receiving anything out of it. So, like how dare God not receive my efforts to be seen by Him or to be noticed by Him, when it's that reality slap of like, oh shoot, nope, you have seen me all along in my striving and in my not striving and in my darkness. And so, man, it is a constant unlearning. I love that you say like a recovering idealizer, right? Because we say this in Crucible, the journey continues. And so we are
Yeah.
continuing to look at these pieces of ourself. But I'm curious on that initial weekend experience that you had as you were in this place of, like learning new rhythms, being in a new spot, having these parts of you that you were just experiencing disappointment in. What did your weekend do for you as you started looking at some of these pieces of who you are?
Hard to unpack that in this short amount of time. So I'm like, oh, what do
uh,
I say to
yeah,
you, Jess, and to the
yeah.
world? There were a lot of things that it did. And what comes to the surface right now for answering this question is it helped me see what pieces of what I was living that I thought were choices everybody else had made
Mm-hmm.
were actually some of my own choices
Mm,
that I so that the reason that that was empowering, some of it was very sad and I felt heaviness about, oh wow, like I am contributing to my life and health in this way,
yeah.
in a negative way, but to see what I actually had the ability to change was really big.
Wow.
And to know, like I mentioned, I think, or you mentioned shadow. I can't remember if it
Yeah.
was me or you, but it came up at some point. The striving is in there. I think that a lot of the things that we don't know about our coping strategies toward life,
Hmm.
are undercurrents that run underneath everything.
Hmm.
And so going to the weekend was a way of examining what some of those were, kind of like the early explorers
Hmm.
who, they're navigating the oceans. They wanted to get to this one spot, but they were getting pushed to another place instead, kind of out of their control because of the undercurrents that were taking them. And there weren't maps yet to show what was out there. So for me, going to the weekend was like going on an exploratory mission, probably,
Hmm.
and starting to develop my own personal map so that
Hmm.
I become more familiar with what my undercurrents are.
Yeah.
And it's not like it started there and that was it. I feel like I'm still working on the
Sure.
maps
Sure.
and I'm still discovering seasonally what the differences are.
Yeah.
Like not everything stays so standard, but it was pretty huge for me. I think just what is really beautiful about it, and Crucible is not the only space that does this, but it uniquely sets this up on
Hmm.
purpose, that you can pull out and look at anything that you have going on, especially the things that you feel shame
Yeah.
about that I didn't want to examine and I didn't want to admit were true.
Yeah.
And I could pull it out and really start to detangle that big knot, you
Mm-hmm.
know. And it's not like I walked away from it totally untangled with none of those tangles and knots in
Of
place,
course.
but it gave clarity for me in a way that I had never tried before. And I really had been trying, me,
Oh
like
yeah.
I'm a striver. I had been trying to untangle it in
uh,
all the ways that I knew how, and it just wasn't working.
mm,
Sometimes whatever I attempted seemed like it left me in worse shape.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And this was something that I came away from feeling lighter
Yeah.
and, like I said, empowered. My life looks a little bit different than when I went
Mm-hmm.
to the Crucible Project and some of my other steps of learning.
Yeah.
But what has changed the most is how I'm approaching my life,
Mm,
not so much the external
yeah.
details. And I'm hoping that some of those still change more, but they didn't have to for me to be healthier,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and to find some healing from those patterns of striving
Yeah.
and help me figure out, like, what is that really about for you, Kim? Why are you doing that?
Mm,
Is there a way that it could get satisfied that doesn't then require as much crazed effort on your part,
yeah. Yeah.
on my part? So
Definitely. That's good. Yeah, I mean, what a powerful experience to have on your weekend. You were mentioning some of those undercurrents of, pieces that you had started to realize about yourself, and that is such a huge shift. I think often, as you were mentioning in the striving, like, okay, if I can change this and that, but to sit there and realize, I think that's such an aha moment for so many who step into this work, is going, whoa, like I am a huge contributor to all of these pieces in my life. And realizing, no matter what changes about people around us or what doesn't change about people around us, like we have to first start looking at ourselves. So, as you were looking at yourself, I know we touched a little bit already on that shadow piece of us, but for those listening, that shadow part of us are those things that we hide and repress and deny about ourselves. And so, as you were looking at yourself, like getting that look in the mirror on that weekend, those undercurrents, was there any shadow that you realized about yourself on that weekend?
I think one of the biggest pieces, and it's interesting because I wouldn't say that I was unaware of
Mm,
this part of myself, but I didn't have any idea like how deep the roots went and
mm,
how much of my life it affected. And it was a way of showing up, like I said, the striving, but
yeah.
what was the purpose behind the striving? What
Mm-hmm.
is my purpose behind that kind of striving? And I think it's so part of the realization was, wow, Kim, this affects you almost everywhere in some way. It
Mm,
it shows up all over, and seeing some of the development through my life, what I saw a piece of and what I think I know now is just we all in our childhood spaces have pain. Everybody
yeah.
does. And
Mm-hmm.
we find our most effective way to deal with it. And then
Yeah.
me in particular, we just do that as much as we can to make our lives less painful and to feel connected with people, to, for me, try to earn love and acceptance if I wasn't, feeling like I was experiencing that, or I wasn't sure of it. And that definitely played forward in a snowball type of a way into
Mm-hmm.
not just a way of showing up in life, but a way that actually was keeping me stuck in the situation that I described. So, there's a lot more I could say about it than that, but I feel like that gives a bird's eye view of
Totally.
some of my learning from my weekend and beyond. Like it doesn't, it's kind of like you scratch the surface and
Mm-hmm.
get to know something that's really there, and then it opens up below that in maybe a
Yeah.
cavernous way, but something
Mm-hmm.
that's
Mm-hmm.
just big, you know?
Yeah,
Um,
right. It's like chopping into the onion and going, whoa, there's a lot of
yeah,
layers here.
yeah.
Um, yeah, but that, that makes sense, right? And so those learned behaviors, whether they were picked up from others or just by you on your own, it sounds like that was serving you well, like for a while. And
Mhm.
so it makes sense that you would keep going after those things, but to sit there and go, wait a second, this isn't serving me as well anymore.
Mhm.
And so I think, yeah, what a like awesome and huge discovery to have in how you can show up differently to life. And part of what I love about Crucible Weekends, though, is that we're not only looking at those shadow sides of us, those ways that we show up, but also looking at the gold that we have in us. So, as you were on your weekend, in your experience, was there any gold that you had discovered about yourself?
Definitely. And some of it was even the fact that I have depth to my soul, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And the gold was so closely tied to the shadow that it was
Mm-hmm.
surprising.
Mm-hmm.
But I felt a great tenderness for myself, and I think just my own story, which
Yeah.
in comparison with other people's stories, I think it's the book Bittersweet. I just listened to that book recently, and they talk
Yeah.
about a 4 tissue story versus a 1 tissue story. I was like a
Mm-hmm.
quarter of a tissue story, is what I felt like my story really was,
Oh,
in life.
yeah, yeah,
But to honor that pain is painful
yeah.
no matter. When you're small, it's a very big deal. And it's formative for us, no matter if it seems like trauma or if it's just
Mm,
difficult, you know?
mm-hmm.
And so some of the gold that I discovered was empathy for myself. I have had
Wow.
empathy for other people like all of my years, but just
Yeah.
came to a place of much greater understanding and empathy for my own little self.
That is so powerful and so cool. And it's funny that you say that. That's part of what I love the most about you is that empathy for others is so evident, like all over you. Like when I look at Kim Rush, I see this gentle spirit who is like, it's something I want to strive for. When I see that, like the
Don't strive
way,
for it. I'm just kidding.
oh my gosh, I know this whole time we're like not striving and
Yeah.
then bring it back.
I'm teasing.
Um
I'm sorry. Teasing you. You
bring it on.
can
It's
see,
good.
you can strive in measured amounts and start to learn balance. And that's what
Exactly.
I'm actually learning too is balance. So I strive still but I'm
Hey,
aware.
bring
I'm
it.
more aware of when I'm doing it and I try to pay
Mm-hmm.
attention to why.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's so cool though that you mentioned that it is your gold is so closely tied to your shadow. And I find that that is so true for many of us. And it makes sense that when you're striving in a way that isn't healthy, it can almost look like health, right? Because
Oh yeah.
that part of you that is empathetic towards others, that invests in others, is real. Like that is a very real part of you. But it's almost that integrated piece of, do I have that empathy inside for myself?
Hmm.
And so to sit there and go like, okay, is this inside matching the outside? And when we're aware of that shadow, I find that our gold can shine that much more, right? Yeah, like that shadow side can then become, okay, like I am not solely doing this for others so that X, like instead it's, this is just out of the overflow of, the gold that I'm aware of. Like similarly, I find that, for myself, like joy is that gold for me, but it can quickly become my shadow if it's operating out of this, I am going to be joyful so that others notice me and see me, and so that I don't feel that pain. And it's inauthentic there, So, how do I look at what's really there underneath that joy? Is it operating out of a real place, or is it operating out of this, okay, I want to be seen? And so, when I'm aware of okay, yep, there's a sadness here that I need to look at. And I am, like you said, like I too, as I look at others with that love, am worthy of looking at that for myself, can then go and yeah, let that joy be the authentic gold that it is. So I'm curious, as you've continued in your journey, it's kind of like a double edged sword, right? Like, what has that gold shadow balance looked like for you as you step into, like caring for yourself in that, as well as then investing in others? Like, what has that been for you?
I definitely think that double-edged sword is an accurate depiction, and I think like flip sides of the same coin, like it's the same coin, and sometimes it's the golden side, and it's the same coin, and on the opposite side there's a negative piece that I need to be aware of. For me right now in this season of my life, some of my learning has been balance, and it's much bigger than just defining it and thinking it's important to me. I
Yeah.
think that my measures, like the gauges that I used, my internal gauges were probably not well calibrated for discernment. And some of that is the early like rigidity
Yeah.
formation that I talked about. Like I'm a
Yeah.
recovering legalist, and
Yeah.
I definitely took blanket statements as like this is the way to do it, instead of thinking about even the Bible, Jess, as a book of wisdom that has advice that contradicts itself on purpose so that I can discern what is appropriate for this moment and how to live into it, but not in such a striving, like always showing up exactly like this way. And I honestly can't remember what your real question was. So you might want to repeat it.
You're just going off preaching. I can't
Yeah.
remember at this point either. So.
Okay. Well, yeah.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah.
It was the question of like, how has that double-edged sword, that, double-sided coin shown up since then? Like, what has stepping into that looked like for you? Yeah, and I think you alluded to it well, that it is this continued learning, right? Like this continued, okay, no, it's this practical piece of how am I going to show up differently? Kind of changing that operating system.
I think even the awareness that it's there, that some of my personality style, like it's so golden, like I would get good praise and results from striving and from pleasing people, and endearing myself to other people and stuff like that. It was hard to see what the negative of that was. And I do think there is great negative, but early in my life I was very blind to it, and like I said, I spent more time then in the pit, and then it was revealed. But to realize, like, Kim, you're setting it up this way actually in a lot of your choices. I felt disbelief about that, honestly. So it's like I believed it and I didn't. And coming away
Yeah.
from that time of learning, the journey does continue. Like I continually see, maybe I'm doing it now. Maybe I'm actually doing it now, which has, for me, for discernment, then I do want to listen to everything that I like, my feelings about a situation, and also step aside from the feelings and look at the facts of the
Yeah.
situation, and try to
Yeah.
see what does God say about all of those? Because I don't think I can just blanket always trust myself in what I feel, but I shouldn't totally discount it, as being valuable and important. So it's looking for that kind of a balance in my approach to life and decision making, which that's everything. Like my approach to everything in a nutshell.
uh, yeah, that's cool. And I love that, as we said, right, the journey continues, and it's this
Yeah.
continued looking at those pieces and going, how do I show up differently? But I love your heart in, making sure that God is at the center of that, making sure that God is the one who you are basing those things off of. And I think that's such a shift when we can, first and foremost go like, okay, like I'm not earning anything with my striving with God. And I know that so often for myself, my striving is based off of people's perspectives, making sure that people are pleased. And so I think it's Louis Giglio who has this quote that says, God is not the reflection of people's love and affection, he is the perfection of it. And so to sit there and go, like, I am perfectly loved without doing any of this. And then that shift of I can do these things out of the overflow of that love, instead of to receive it is, so powerful.
What I think is so key to that for me right now, and this is the stage that I'm in, or the step that I'm on now, and I have
Yeah.
been for a few years, is where I place my identity. And it's not that I never heard about that before. It's not that I never even tried to evaluate it. I feel much more familiar with the reality of how I've done it, that's off balance and off center, and really receiving my true worth and identity from God, so that I'm not looking for it in a starved way and willing
Yeah.
to just take whatever comes,
Yeah.
I actually had a great victory. And it's something that recently, like yesterday, I had a conversation that I had set up with somebody that I felt fearful about. I thought that it was probably going to be hard. And it's a conversation that I feel like I've had in some ways before. And this time, what was different was I was integrating. This is with somebody that I don't have very much contact with now in my life, but had the possibility to be in contact with in a consistent way again. But we have very different priorities. What we desire and dream about is different, and there are some unaddressed big question marks for me about
Yeah.
all of that. And instead of just saying, yeah, like I'd love to because it's a possibility that I don't want to miss, I was like, you know what, it's really a no for me now. And that was hard,
Wow.
but
Wow.
but big too. And it's like,
Yeah.
for somebody else that would be actually small, because they more
Sure.
frequently
Sure.
show up with no's, and their work might be saying yes to some small things that are a stretch. But for me, the stretch is a no that feels like it might shut the door to something really positive
Yeah.
down the road, but it doesn't seem positive at this place. And I don't want to pretend that it will all be fine. I want to just be honest and say no.
That's huge. That's really huge. And as a fellow, I am also not someone who says no easily. And so, yeah, no, that is huge. Like what a big step in, I think, that awareness of who you are, right? And that awareness of who God is calling you to be in this moment. And like giving God your best yes sometimes
Yeah.
look like giving other people no. And that's, that is real. In I think of the verse, I can't think of the title of it, but that let your yes be your yes and your no be your no. Like it is, as you said, it's integrating that part with yourself, and to be in integrity with yourself in that is huge. So that is awesome. And I'm curious, you've talked a little bit about where you are now. As I mentioned earlier, you are one of our certified retreat leaders with Crucible. So what does it look like for you leading now? Like, what are your joys in it? How do you even step in and say, like, yeah, I want to lead in this space?
Yeah, well, I'm not really taking a gap year. That was just a
Man, I was
maybe
gonna
like a
hop
bad
on
rumor
that
that might get
train.
started. I got to start stepping into leadership with Crucible in small ways a while ago, and I think that's actually a possibility for anybody that's interested at the
Yeah.
capacity where they are right now. So that's exciting. And
Yep.
I mean, it even helped me sort out some of the flip side of my golden shadow, genuinely, because it's like,
Sure.
wait, why am I saying yes to this right now when I'm really maxed out? And so some of what I have picked up along the way with it is still contributing to my learning. But what's interesting and exciting for me is, like, I am looking ahead to more availability, and it's meeting my passions, and like this season of my life, where I'm going to have more time, um, again, Jess, I can't remember your exact question. I kind of lost it.
Just leadership and Crucible, all that goodness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Crucible for women is at a unique stage because it's brimming with possibility, which, I love possibility. I get
It's so
it's
exciting.
my joy, and it really it feels exciting. So with leadership right now, my desire and focus, I think this is part of my mission training, but it's God like matching me in, I think, the right spot for me and for this season is about reproducible leadership. So my passion is to invite other women into this kind of space that is so fulfilling for me personally. I think that it connects with God. It's a space that provides safety because we look at why we're really doing what we're doing with our coworkers and the other people that we lead with and that we serve with, instead of just blindly requiring that we come up with a good product and make it happen kind of thing. So my hope is that it will contribute to my my own soul work, and also multiply out for other women and their families and their churches and their children. And I feel like I've lived the benefit of receiving from other people that have led me well, and I'm still getting to do that. And I also feel excitement about sharing it, like passing it along. And I actually think that's one of the things that I really love about Crucible is the way that that's a desire for the organization because of how people grow when they share. And in a broad way, we're sharing some of the love of Jesus and the healing that's possible in restoration with Christ, which that reaches out into everybody's lives, any decisions that they're making in the spaces where they lead in their lives, like in their families, their jobs, churches, and communities. But I think that it's accessible to other people. And I feel like that's where my passion lies now too, is helping to make that happen.
Yeah, there's so much there that I echo. Like it's just amazing. And I love that you mentioned like you can start leading at any capacity, and really leading is just helping someone else along, right? Like it doesn't, I think oftentimes we're like, oh, I'm not qualified to be a leader, I can't do this, but as Kim said, like who are the people who've invested in you, like what characteristics have come out of in you because of that, and then how can you bring someone else along in that? And that's what a lot of Crucible is, reproducing leaders, like saying, hey, I see this in you, and let's bring this along. And also I love that you brought up just the realm of new possibilities and how that gets you excited. And so we got to, one of my favorite Kim memories is we got to go to Australia together to staff a retreat this November, which was awesome. And one of the craziest moments was it was the day of, our second level retreat. And I think, I don't know, many people would be like, what in the actual heck? But between our two personalities who were like, this seems fun, we developed like an online program all in one day. And we're sitting in the back of this Aussie car, like coming up with, this online version of a retreat. And so I love that with your personality of, we can make this work. And so we're dreaming up this whole thing, made it happen. And I didn't realize how weird it was until I was explaining that in a staff meeting in a different setting. And this gentleman who is on staff with me, he goes, Jess, what you called exciting, I would have called a crap show. Like, what? And I'm like, oh, that's probably true, but anyways, that was golden.
It was golden. It was. I think what's beautiful about it, like, we have I think we have amazing teams, So we had the support of a great team and the dreaming possibilities of all of our let me count 5 minds. It's not as many as I thought. It's not as many, but it felt big. and
Uh-huh.
and people like just willing to work together to make it happen,
Yeah,
because,
yeah.
and this is what's so cool too, some of our people that were going to attend that retreat were prevented from
Yeah.
coming due to illness, and they had to
Mm-hmm.
be
Mm-hmm.
online or not do it. So it was like, we can do this.
Yeah,
We can do
totally.
this. Yeah. And I think that it came together beautifully,
Yeah,
honestly.
yeah. It
Um
was amazing.
yeah, and it is energizing for me. It's funny, that kind of stuff, like, I don't
Mm-hmm.
like to cook following recipes that much,
Sure,
and it's not
sure.
because I'm not capable. It's because
Mm-hmm.
some of the excitement is lost in just having to do exactly what is written, you know?
Totally.
And sometimes with
Totally.
our leadership, we do need to do what's written because it was written with
Yes.
wisdom, and a lot of thought was put into it, but there is the possibility for growth and
Yeah.
something new. And I think we're in a stage of a
Mm.
lot of things that are going to be new in the
Yep,
next little
yep.
while here.
Which gets me so excited. And again, that's also my personality. So, so I'm on board for it. But I'm curious, as obviously it's not a gap year, but as you look to the future life of Kim, like what are some of those, just passions, things that get you excited that you're like, man, I want to utilize these parts of me. Like, what are you looking at in those areas?
um I am uh I'm looking at, like you already said, stepping into leading more retreats with Crucible.
Mm-hmm.
And then beyond that, I have a ministry that supports and provides like pastoral care for missionaries
Mm-hmm.
and other women, even women like in ministry within the United States. But I have that missions like history, and I have a lot of um, I just have a heart for it, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a population of people that are human too, and working through
Mm-hmm.
all the
Mm-hmm.
same struggles, and then some unique and different ones that come from international missions and
Mm-hmm.
working on teams. So this past year with my husband, I got to do some team building
Mm.
retreats. They're kind of mini retreats, but
Yeah.
one was on site and one was over Zoom, just helping teams to communicate better and to get on the same page with their goals and visions.
Mm-hmm.
Um, doing some coaching, like through some hard times that people are having. But I want to see more of that happen, for myself.
Yeah.
And I get excited about how it grows. I think those are the kinds of things that grow exponentially. And of course, I'm very into that. I just love what
Totally.
keeps snowballing forward in big and beautiful ways. It's like
Yeah.
that idealizer is not all the way disappeared, because that's a flip side coin thing too.
Sure.
It's like
Sure.
I need to be able to be realistic about what's really happening and haven't lost the dreamer in me,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. And
Um,
I love that dreamer. That is so cool. And we talked about this at the beginning too, but to look at God's thread through your story, right? Of like he used every detail. He used all of those pieces through missionary school, through the disappointments, through Mexico and leaving there, and all of those pieces. Like he was giving you this tool belt, Crucible included, to now come and invest in these missionaries. Like, how cool is God that, all those pieces would tie together?
yeah,
So,
I really do
yeah.
feel like that about God. Like,
Mm.
I don't believe God is causative toward all
Mm-hmm.
the chaos and the
Mm-hmm.
disappointments and the hurts and hardships. But he knows how to recycle all of it, like to
Yeah.
utilize
Yeah.
it in a meaningful way, and doesn't let even like a drop of that go to waste.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
To put it back into something that's really revelatory for each one of us. I think I do
Mm-hmm.
not learn the same lessons about myself and about life when everything goes well. I come
Yeah.
out of that
Totally.
thinking that I smell great and
Yep.
everything
Yep.
is perfect, and
uh,
that doesn't open my eyes to some of the realities, the
mm-hmm.
undercurrents that are really there. And so,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think I mean, I think God is still has the thread weaving. It'll be fun
Oh my
to look
gosh,
back
yeah.
even after a year and 5 years
Yep.
to see, where it went and
Yeah.
in what unexpected ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he is always doing a new thing, and like always, yeah, using the past, using the present, and so I'll even be excited to see where that thread continues to weave. Man, what a gift it's been to have you on today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Jess. I'm really glad to be with you, recorded or not. Like, we should talk sometime without the microphone. That would be
Right?
good.
Awesome. All right, we'll see y'all next time.
For more information about our weekends, please go to thecrucibleproject.org. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Rate and review wherever you are listening and subscribe on your preferred podcast platform. Also, don't forget to check out myjourney2.com for your free 2-week trial. That's myjourneyto.com. Thank you for listening.